So good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are, and welcome to this month's AGI Heads and Chairs webinar, where we'll be looking at a large spectrum of diversity initiatives that are going on across the geosciences. And I think it's a very exciting time because there are so many large initiatives that are aligning quite similarly and are very complementary. We do have a very large lineup of speakers and a lot of material to cover. So this month's webinar is actually, we're scheduled for an hour and a half, and I hope that you'll be able to stick with us for the entire time and join in the conversation. So hosting today is Pranoti Asher, the Assistant Director of Grants and Education Programs at AGU, and myself, Christopher Keene. I'm Director of Geoscience Profession and Higher Education at AGI. And I'll turn it over to Pranoti.
All right, thanks, Chris. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited that all of you have joined us this afternoon or morning for our webinar. We have, as Chris mentioned, a huge lineup of speakers here. So as you can see on the slides, we have Steve Boss, who's a professor in the Geosciences at the University of Arkansas, and he's representing the Geological Society of America's Geosciences Ascent program. Erika Marin-Spiotta, who's a professor of geography at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, is going to be talking about the ADVANCEGeo program. Margaret Fraiser and Brielle Bennett, who are my colleagues at AGU, the Director of Diversity and Inclusion and the Senior Program Specialist, are representing AGU Landing, the big program AGU Landing. Brielle will speak specifically to the community of practice. Susan Sullivan, who is here from CIRES, is the Director of Inclusion, Diversity and Inclusion there, is going to be representing AGI's Intersociety Diversity Committee. So without any further ado, Steve, why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much, Pranoti, and thank you, Chris, for inviting me to present today to the AGI Chairs and Heads meeting. My name is Steve Boss. I'm Professor of Environmental Dynamics and Sustainability in the Department of Geosciences at the University of Arkansas. And my first slide here is the title slide from a talk I just gave at GSA, and I'm showing the slide mainly just because it includes my other PIs on this project with me. And I want to acknowledge them first. Anita Marshall, who's at the University of Florida and also Executive Director of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity. Angel Garcia, who's Assistant Professor at James Madison University. Del Reno, who's Assistant Professor at Arizona State University. Vicki McConnell, who is the Executive Director of the Geological Society of America, who's now retiring. And Kathy Ellens, University of Texas at Austin, who's our evaluator for the project. So the project I'm working on is called Geosciences Ascend, and Geosciences Ascend stands for Geosciences Associated Societies Committed to Embracing and Normalizing Diversity. And these are the Geosciences Associated Societies with the Geological Society of America, primarily, that we're working with. And the operative words here are committed to normalizing diversity. And to start off that discussion, I want to briefly give you a definition here of culture, because our focus is trying to alter geoscience culture in some way to make a more inclusive discipline. But culture consists of the beliefs, behaviors, objects, and other characteristics common to the members of a particular group or society. Through culture, people and groups define themselves, conform to culture's shared values, establish and enforce cultural norms, and contribute to and perpetuate culture. And in this context, then, if we view culture from the framework of systems dynamics, culture is really an emergent property of complex systems of social interactions. And the words above, where we talk about people defining themselves, conforming to culture's shared values, those shared values are kind of the folkways of culture. Establish and enforce cultural norms. Norms are behaviors, established behaviors of the culture, established and accepted behaviors of the culture. And the mores are just, again, part of the culture's shared values. And so our focus is trying to really influence the folkways, mores, and especially the norms of culture. And if we can establish new cultural norms, by definition, you're altering culture. I think we're all familiar with systems dynamics a little bit. Some may be more familiar than others, but we know from physical systems that we can model physical systems using systems dynamics principles. But Jay Forrester, the originator of systems dynamics at MIT in the 1960s, and his research group, which included Danilo Meadows, demonstrated quite conclusively in the 1960s that not only were physical systems modelable using system dynamics, but social systems could be modeled quite effectively using systems dynamics as well. And that's where our focus comes in Geoscience Ascend. We're trying to influence geoscience culture, a social system. So the objectives of Geosciences Ascend is to frame geosciences culture using a systems dynamics perspective, to advance and accelerate cultural change in geosciences, to broaden participation of diverse identities in geosciences, and create a more inclusive discipline in which all people can participate and contribute. And the way we're doing this is working with Geosciences associated societies. Currently, we have 32 member organizations out of the 70+ associated societies affiliated with the Geological Society of America. I'm proud to say that AGU and AGI are both affiliated members of Geosciences Ascend Network. And our goal is to create a broad scale program across all these societies so that we embrace and normalize diversity in ways that alter the culture. And we're just now really starting this year a new initiative. We finally figured out, I think, the leverage point that we want to work on to influence the system here and move forward. And I'm pretty excited about it right now. There seems to be a lot of excitement among the associated societies in the RCN here, working with us to move forward on this. And I think one of the things that I like about systems dynamics, one, I really dig chaos, and two, I dig even more when order emerges from chaos. And second, once you get the right leverage point in the system, oftentimes you know it because the system just takes off and runs on its own. And I think we've just gotten to that point in Geosciences Ascend. So I'm very excited about it, and I'm happy to sort of engage more of that discussion as we go forward here. But I don't want to take up too much of my time. I think that might be my last slide. Yeah, that's right. And again, if any of you have interest in Geosciences Ascend after we have this discussion today, you're free to contact me at geosciencesascend@gmail.com. That's our project email address. And feel free to contact me later if you have questions. But Geosciences Ascend, again, is focused primarily on working with geosciences associated societies, not necessarily individuals, but societies and also institutions, I think, are welcome to try to participate with us if you want to. And that's all I have for now. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So go ahead, Margaret and Brielle.
All right, I hope y'all can hear me okay. Hey everybody, I am Margaret Fraiser. My pronouns are she, her. I'm Director of Diversity and Inclusion and at AGU, and I'm here with my colleague Brielle Bennett, our Senior Program Specialist and Community Manager. We're going to give a high-level overview of aspects of landing, which is AGU's one of AGU's new initiatives for a systemic cultural shift in the geosciences. And I also want to say that we're lucky that some of our partners in landing are on this panel as well. So in the next slide, we give just a little bit of an idea of AGU's DEI foundations and frameworks. So AGU has a history and deep foundation for promoting and supporting ethics and inclusion. One of the three strategic goals for AGU is to promote and exemplify an inclusive scientific culture, and diversity and inclusion are recognized and celebrated as being essential for the success of AGU, its members, and the global Earth and space science enterprise. However, as we are all aware, the very slow to no progress broadening participation in geosciences suggests barriers that are foundational, and a cultural shift is needed. I'm really glad that Steve Boss went before me because picking right up on the cultural shift need. So in the next slide, these are our strategies for change. So this is a research-based model that is rooted in social and organizational sciences to affect change. So one of these is to leverage AGU's commitment to ethics and equity, AGU being the largest professional society for Earth and space science. Another strategy is to build capacity for diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. Another strategy is to provide networks of support from all who are curious about diversity, equity, and inclusion practices all the way to those who consider themselves leaders in this area, and then promoting visibility and recognition of DEI work and leaders. And so with these strategies, we have implemented this project called Landing. And so in the next slide, a little bit about landing. So landing is an anagram for leadership, or an acronym for Leadership Academy and Network for Diversity and Inclusion in the Geosciences. So we are a group of scientists, social scientists, and DEI champions, and this is the model that we proposed and that we are using to try to affect cultural shift. There are two main parts to landing. The first is a community of practice that Brielle will talk about to build champion networks within and beyond AGU, and then an academy that will provide providing targeted professional development for DEI champions. And with these two parts, the intention is to lead a shift to a more inclusive geosciences culture where all people feel safe and welcome to bring all aspects of themselves. So in the next slide, a little bit about one of those aspects of landing, the Landing Academy. This is a 2-year program. It is cohort-based professional development for leaders in geosciences, and they also develop and implement a broadening participation project. In the first year of Landing Academy, we have created and facilitated curricula on DEI foundations, individual and systemic bias, inclusive mentoring, just to name a few. The first cohort began in 2021 and was selected from mid to late career stages, and the second cohort will be selected in 2023. In the next slide, just a little bit about our meetings. So one of the aspects of the Academy are what we call summits. These are 2 to 3 days of presentations and activities from experts. They also comprise networking opportunities between the Academy fellows and space to solicit advice on their broadening participation projects. So in alignment with all of our curriculum goals, we held the first summit last year. It was focused on DEI foundations, including understanding the challenges of broadening participation in STEM, the science of bias, how to speak up, and how to build connections. In the next slide, I give a little bit of information about our monthly virtual meetings. These meetings are about 2.5 to 3 hours in length and offer additional professional development with topics within each unit. In addition to expert speakers like the ones shown here, the monthly meetings include time for leadership discussions and identifying emerging needs. And this is also a place where we can support fellows' development of their leadership project. And then speaking of the leadership project, in the next slide, just a little bit about these broadening participation projects. So this graphic illustrates how the Academy curriculum overlaps with fellows' development and implementation of their broadening participation leadership project. And there are some key deliverables throughout the year. So for example, a formal proposal, a proposal presentation, progress reports, and a final report. I know also that y'all are aware that postdoctoral scholars have unique needs. So their positions are short-term, they are often precarious. Postdoctoral scholars can have families, they're actively doing research and looking for jobs, among many, many other things to deal with. And maybe because of this, or despite this, they're largely an underserved population of early career scholars in geosciences in terms of networking and professional development. So in addition, awareness of diversity, equity, and inclusion topics and commitment to inclusive environments are valued in sectors where they apply for jobs, but there's no one-stop place for this in the earth and space sciences. And so the Landing PRFP, so a postdoctoral research fellows program with the Leadership Academy for Network and Diversity and Inclusion in the Geosciences, is another National Science Foundation funded professional program at AGU. Landing PRFP was designed to provide intentional DEI professional development at this critical career transition. And I think my colleague Aixa Alaman-Diaz is also on the call today, and she is one of the co-leads of this. We are providing this professional development through our curriculum, intended to develop knowledge and skills and awareness of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. Within the curriculum, postdocs are also creating tangible items that they can use now or in their future jobs. So for example, like a statement of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or help writing inclusive interview questions. And we are also facilitating the building of postdocs professional networks for diversity, equity, and inclusion champions among cohorts of the scholars and also with other DEI leaders. And Brielle is going to talk about the community of practice aspect of the PRFP program in just a moment. I have just a couple more slides here for my part. In this next slide, we have photographs of all 38 of the postdoctoral fellows for the Landing PRFP program. We think we're doing something really novel here. There's not a program we know of comprising diversity, equity, and inclusion focused professional development and networking for the Earth and Space Sciences, or for as long, so for a 2-year interval. And so for now, the National Science Foundation is funding the Division of Ocean Sciences and the Office of Polar Programs new postdoctoral programs. These are the postdocs that are funded, and we would like to expand this beyond the current 2 divisions, Ocean Sciences and the Office of Polar Programs, and we'd also like to expand this beyond National Science Foundation funded scholars. And then in my last slide, I believe, just a little bit about our Landing PRFP activities. We have virtual meetings that are very interactive, and they comprise talks, peer writing and reviewing, and discussion. We will have a 2-day summit at the beginning of fall meeting this year. Overall, the postdoctoral fellows get about 85 hours of diversity, equity, and inclusion professional development. And we are, at the end, we are having a recognition reception in order to elevate the scholars' visibility and their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right, so I think I'm going to pass it over to Brielle now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Margaret. My name is Brielle Bennett, and I'm the AGI Learning Community of Practice Manager. And so Margaret just provided you all with an overview of some of our formal cohort-based programming, and I'm going to share a little bit about our community of practice. So the community of practice is an online community designed to connect and provide professional development for diversity, equity, and inclusion champions in the geosciences. And so DEI champions can range from those who are interested in supporting DEI efforts but have not yet began the work, and they're probably at the curious stage of learning about different issues and terminology, all the way to those who are actively engaged in the work or consider themselves DEI scholars. And so our goal is to become a central hub for resources and networking opportunities that connect individuals across that range. And so we recently soft launched the community of practice in March of this year, and we started off with a few different engagement methods, one of them being the AGI Landing Inclusive Science webinar series. And so part of the goal of creating this community of practice was to highlight personal and professional journeys of those who working at various intersections of DEI work. And so we found this webinar series to be really valuable for attendees, and we're currently working to identify our next lineup of speakers. And then some of the other features that we have are crowdsource resource library that we have developed in partnership with the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, or WEPAN, and other DEI scholars. And then our members also have the ability to add to this library. And we also have some discussion spaces that we are currently in the process of revamping. And then we also have a language glossary for DEI terminology and a space to highlight upcoming DEI events and news. And then on the next slide, this effort would not be possible without our amazing group of community ambassadors. They have been advising on strategies for building engagement within the community of practice. And part of their current work is to assist us with enhancing our existing resources, developing community value statements, identifying additional ways that we can facilitate collaboration and recognition of DEI champions. And so that's just some of the work that they're doing this year that we hope to be able to roll out for the next year. And I believe that is my last slide. And so I could turn it back over to Margaret to close out our portion.
Thanks, Brielle. So I just want to end on this. We have a huge team working on landing, and we work on this every day. We've been able to dedicate about 10 people to this program. We also have a program evaluator and a professional facilitator that we work with, and they're not listed here. Four and a half of us work nearly full time on landing related activities and projects. So we just consider ourselves very lucky that we can dedicate our energy and time to this project. And so in the next slide, please reach out to us with any questions or concerns you might have. Thanks very much for listening.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the ADVANCEGeo partnership. I'm Erika Marin-Spiotta. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I use she, her pronouns, and I want to acknowledge my team of co-PIs, Dr. Jessica Blois, who's at UC Merced, Dr. Melissa Burt is at Colorado State, Dr. Meredith Hastings at Brown University, Dr. Sora Kim is at UC Merced, Dr. Allison Matthias is at California State, LA, Dr. Blair Schneider is at the Kansas Geological Society, Billy Williams at AGU, hi Billy, Christine Bell is our internal evaluator, and Julie Martins is our external evaluator. So we received funding from the NSF Advanced program a few years ago. We're just wrapping up the first stage of our project to build this ADVANCEGeo partnership. And the original partners were the Earth Science Women's Network, Association for Women Geoscientists, and AGU. And we have since added quite a few number of other partners. In the first stage, we worked closely with the Geological Society of America, Soil Science Society of America, and the Ecological Society of America. And our first part of the project had four main goals. The first was to develop and deliver bystander intervention training with discipline-specific scenarios that incorporate the role of intersectionality in people's disproportionate experiences in their discipline, collect data on workplace climate for the geosciences, develop educational materials that identify harassment, bullying, and discrimination as research misconduct, and developing a sustainable model that can be transferred to other disciplines in partnership with professional societies. And here's just the partners on the team. You can see we're working with both universities and professional societies across the country. And so our project, we wrote the proposal to work on the problem of sexual harassment in the geosciences, and very quickly realized that sexual harassment does not happen in a vacuum, and that environments that tolerate sexual harassment also tolerate other types of hostile and exclusionary behaviors. And there's been a lot of work trying to understand the low persistence and low representation of a lot of different groups in STEM, focusing on bias. And our project has been really thinking about the types of climates that people experience once they enter a field. So focusing more on retention rather than recruitment. And so we've been working on identity-based harassment and microaggressions, bullying and intimidation, interpersonal mistreatment, and ambient harassment that people might experience. And so we ran a workplace climate survey through a number of professional societies in the geosciences, and we ran a parallel one in the ecological sciences. The ecological sciences survey paper just got accepted, will be out soon, and the one for the geosciences is currently under review. And I just wanted to share some of the take-home messages because these have really informed the work that our project has been doing. So we found that workplace experiences in the geosciences differ by gender, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability status, and career stage. We found that historically excluded groups experience more negative workplace environments and are more likely to report negative career outcomes. So we see professional consequences of these experiences. And so we propose that diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts need to address hostile behavior effects on careers and retention in the geosciences. And so our project has been taking an approach that's been informed by a framework of intersectionality and really thinking about the role of intersecting oppressions and how people's identities influence their experiences. Thinking about a feminist ethics of care in the type of work that we do and how we do it, as well as research integrity. And we have four main strategies for change. The first is thinking about how do we trigger, how do we catalyze, a better word, individual accountability through bystander intervention education, thinking about how do we engage community by making people feel that we're all part of a community and that we're responsible for the well-being of our community. Also through the implementation of ethical codes of conduct and safety protocols, and taking advantage of our partnerships with professional associations as vehicles for change in the discipline. And one of the justifications for this is that, a lot of us might change our employer during our career, but we might actually stay, our identity might be more closely tied to our professional society, and professional societies have a lot of advantages in changing the culture in a discipline. And we've been focusing on these persistent inequities in gendered and racialized organizations and disciplines, and some of these behaviors that I've mentioned already. And so we've been really focusing on intersectionality and informing the type that we work, that recognizes that the problems of inequities in our discipline are a function of social injustice and oppression. They're really structural and systemic problems, and really thinking about the role of identity and positionality, how unequal power dynamics play out, and focusing beyond gender. A lot of efforts in the geosciences historically have focused on gender, and recognizing that there's a lot of other identities that are really important. We've experienced some improvements in the representation of women in the geosciences, for example, but that's mostly white women, not women of color. And so that's why we changed from focusing on sexual harassment to really think about hostile climates more broadly that have a disproportionate impact and influence field safety as well. And so we've spent a lot of time thinking about field safety and how hostile and exclusionary behaviors and stereotypes of who is a geoscientist and who belongs in the geosciences can affect people's feelings, not only of belonging, but also really of safety and vulnerability in the field. And thinking about, to acknowledge, people's full participation in our discipline, we need to think about accessibility, inclusivity, equity, and also building environments that are free from harassment and discrimination. We've been informed by a feminist ethics of care approach, which really focuses on community-based intervention and really thinking about how we're all part of a community and that we have a social responsibility to our communities, both our working communities, our learning communities, our professional communities, because we're all part of, we're all related, we all have these professional and social relations, and we interdepend on each other. And so we need to build a sense of accountability so that people's welfare is our responsibility and of interest, and then thinking about how do we actually provide people with skills to do that. And so we've been thinking a lot about the role of leadership and modeling accountability and valuing the labor of care, and thinking about, how do we inform the practices that we do, both in terms of our interventions as well as the way that our research team works, with really thinking about how do we, the feminist ethics of care approach is really thinking about how do we reduce harm in all the work that we're doing. And so I wanted to show a little bit of data from our workshops, our projects, or our team. We have a national team of trainers. We've run over 200 workshops in the last couple of years. And one of the main things that we're doing during workshops is teaching bystander intervention skills and really thinking about community engagement through building accountability. And so, for example, we're seeing that people are resonating very well with these strategies. And I wanted to read 2 quotes here from some of the workshop evaluations. The first is from a faculty workshop participant that says, as someone who does not like confrontation, it gave me tools to work with. And a graduate student said, why are they motivated to do this work? Because I want to change the culture of academia, and it starts by actively using these strategies. And then finally, in addition to behavioral change through kind of this ground up community accountability and responsibility and sense of social engagement, we've also been working on bringing in these issues of harassment, bullying, discrimination, into conversations of research ethics, working with AGU and their recent code of conduct. And so thinking about recognizing the role of power dynamics and bringing in, codes of conduct into our learning environments, working environments, as a role of bringing in accountability as well. And so really thinking about how do we change culture and climate, and we need to do this at all different levels. So we've been working the bystander intervention. It works at the individual and community-based level because we're trying to get people to do these things together. And then thinking about how do we change culture at the institutions, and then what is the important role of both professional societies and funding agencies. And then I just want to finish off by sharing some of the resources that our team has also developed. We have a great website of community resources written for scientists hosted at CIRC. The ADVANCEGeo partnership is really excited to announce that we've gotten a new grant from the ADVANCE program. And so we've been able to grow our team of partners, and we're really excited to continue the work that we're doing and expand on it. And then the next slide. This has our final, the final slide is just talking about some of the big four aims of this next stage of our grant, where we're going to be building on the workshop program that we've developed so far and thinking about, how do we build in a workplace climate intervention program, developing and testing a train-the-trainer certification so we can build our team and come up with a more sustainable model and continue working on online resources for the community. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Erika. My name is Pranoti Asher, and I'm joined today with my colleague Eva Kostju, who is involved in all aspects of the AGU Bridge program. I know many folks in our community have heard a little bit about the Bridge program, but I wanted to share sort of a big program overview and share some recent successes and some information about the program in case you're interested in getting involved. The AGU Bridge program is part of a larger NSF-funded Includes Alliance project called IGEN, or Inclusive Graduate Education Network. So the goal of the Bridge program is to advance equity in the geosciences with a specific focus on graduate school education. By engaging with academic departments, working to adopt equitable practices, and by providing direct student support, we hope to increase the representation of students from communities who have been historically marginalized in the geosciences. So currently we're working with about 46 partner graduate departments who apply for partnership through a very competitive application process. Once that department is selected, that partner department can then make offers to students through the Bridge program application. For students who are interested in getting involved in the Bridge program, they can submit one application for consideration by all of our partner departments, and any student who accepts an offer through the Bridge program is automatically enrolled as a program participant. They're called a Bridge Fellow, and the application is hosted by the Inclusive Graduate Education. And this allows us to host the application portal in partnership with Bridge programs and other societies, such as the American Physical Society and the American Chemical Society. I won't read through everything here, but I want to emphasize that for the students, the Bridge Fellows, we're trying to build a very supportive community and cohort of peers that students can engage with outside of their own academic departments. We've been working over time to expand our programming for students, thanks to all the wonderful work that Eva does. And now we can offer at least more than 1 or 2 events per semester. And these range from, social, virtual social gatherings to professional development, sort of topics like career panels. We just yesterday hosted a career panel from early career scientists from NOAA, and one previous to that was from USGS. So we're trying to focus on building more community, like and also a lot of learning that goes on during these conversations. For some students, they're the only Bridge participant in their department. So, and then there are some departments that may have more than one student that is a Bridge Fellow. So by having all of these students come together on a regular basis, we're trying to engage them across departments and create a cohort and sort of peer support for one another. So we have many things that allow these students to engage. We have a Slack community. They get an AGU membership. We engage with them if they're attending the AGU fall meeting. we find ways to disseminate other information for them and share all kinds of resources that are both AGU and non-AGU sort of related. Most importantly, these departments who are accepting these students, they do provide sort of a status report on how the student is doing, you know, not grades or anything like that, but the fact that they're still enrolled and they're making progress towards all the milestones for their degree. So many of you may remember this program started in 2019 and the first cohort of students began graduate school in 2020. We want to highlight that our cohort of students has grown through every year, and now we have about 42 students that are enrolled after we started with 7 students in 2020. We also want to celebrate our first graduate of the program who just finished their master's degree this past spring. They are going on to pursue their PhD at a non-Bridge affiliated institution internationally. So they are officially our first program alums. So anyone who's not familiar, by the way, with the term first generation in this context, we're referring to students who identify as the first in their family to have completed an undergraduate degree. So you can see some data here. On the partner side, on the department side, we grew from 13 departments in our first cohort round of applications to now having about 46 departments, which I think is about nearly 20% of sort of active geoscience graduate programs in the US. 13 of these 46 institutions are minority serving institutions, which is a title designated by the US Department of Education. So in addition to reviewing student applications and making offers to the students themselves for admission into their departments, the department leaders engage both with AGU as well as iGen to sort of create, so we are working with them to create both a cohort of change makers in departments and also providing them with training and resources. So we are excited to share that not so long ago, we had our first mentor training workshop for them. We continue to grow our engagement programs with the departments themselves. So again, you can see there are a host of things that these departments are engaged in doing, including providing us with sort of regular student progress reports. So the departments that are selected need to, again, they go through a competitive process. They need to demonstrate intentional reflection and action on 8 components that range from admissions to mentoring practices to how they track student data, and of course, demonstrate a commitment to continuing learning to evolve and grow. We've listed some examples of practice that our partners have taken up. Either they have reported these in their annual reports, or things that were already in place in their departments at the time they submitted their applications. And last but not least, of course, this is an NSF funded project, so we have evaluation is a large component of this project. Of the iGen project, and we engage with an external evaluator called WestEd, who has provided the iGen team it's sort of a draft of annual reports. We apologize that this slide is super text heavy, but I wanted to show you that we have had both successes as well as challenges. The quotes here sort of offer a snapshot, but one thing that stood out from the report was the value and impact of mentors on student experiences and the impact, both positive and negative, that a student's advisor will have on their graduate experience. We know that when it comes to addressing institutional racism and how an advisor's cultural identity may affect their mentoring style, our faculty in the geosciences are really under-equipped. So continuing education on this piece has been sort of a focus of both iGen as well as AGU. And with the recent mentor training that we offered, we had a focus on incorporating identity into mentoring. So we look forward to continuing to work with our partners and help them grow in this area so they can offer more impactful support for students. This is just one example that we wanted to share here. So with that, I say thank you very much, and we can move on to the next speaker.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here and part of this panel. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Susan Sullivan. I am Director of Diversity and Inclusion at CIRES at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I chair the AGI Intersociety DEI Committee. I also want to recognize Chris Keene from AGI, who helps to co-lead and support that committee as well. So the committee emerged as the first recommendation of an AGI community document, which is the framework for addressing racial and ethnic equity in geosciences professional societies. And thank you to those of you who are here who contributed to that document. That document pulls from the No Time for Silence, led by Vernon Morris and others, and the Call for an Anti-Racist Plan in the Geosciences, led by Hendrada Ali and others. And it pulls out many of the elements that were specific to professional societies there. The first element of the framework is to form a committee, such as this one, to support action on the rest of the work that societies need to do. I'm going to put in the chat all of the links that are pertinent to things I'm talking about. I apologize, it looks like they're in purple, or I hope you can see them. So the DEI working group meets monthly, and we share resources. We talk about how to actually do a lot of the things that we would like to do, and get into some of the details and the nitty-gritty of doing it when it's complex. None of these things are super simple. All of them take a lot of effort. So these are the topics we've looked at so far. Many of them have to do with some of the core functions of a professional society or association. And we're going to continue that over the next few months, talking about things such as demographics, and once you collect them, how do you use them so that they're private and secure, and other aspects of making change that the societies are working towards. All federated societies are invited to participate, so I invite you to look at the link in the chat. And if you're part of a federated society, we'd love to have a representative. I'll show you who is already represented, and you can see if there's an opportunity for your society. So in the AGI Future of the Geosciences survey, I'm very happy to note that diversity and inclusion was the top challenge that organizations said they were facing. And that is more, they said that was more important to them than many of the other things that are on their slate: membership and workforce, and all of the other things that they're responsible for. So that gives us, that motivation gives us a good basis for this and all the other work that you've been hearing about today. So these are the societies that are currently participating in the DEI working group. And I want to acknowledge and thank those representatives who are here on the call today. Thank you for your participation and for all the work that you're doing. So this is about 24 society, well, roughly half of the AGI federated societies. And just thank you for your participation. Now, the theory of change that is underlying this work is, you'll hear, it's very similar to some of the things that you've been hearing from the other speakers, but it's based on a theory of change that's about developing DEI as a mature function of the organization, just like all the other mission critical aspects of a society, you know, thinking about membership, thinking about revenue, thinking about forwarding your scientific mission as an organization. This is about making DEI just as mission critical and as served by the organization as the other mission critical goals. So when organizations become more mature, they move from a siloed model where DEI responsibility is held in maybe a DEI committee or a person, and moves towards a more integrated and sophisticated approach where leaders are responsible and have capacity for it, and everybody has responsibility and capacity for it. So that's where we're moving towards. But the question is, how do you actually get there? So if that's the vision, what are the tools and the things to have that work together to get to that magic place where it's integrated? And a lot of the things you've heard about are part of that. They form a system that has feedbacks and kind of builds on itself. So starting with clear expectations and assessment and ways to know how you're doing, helping people develop skills and dispositions, and having support and resources for the people who are in your organization. So all of these things, when you get them going, they work together, and you learn and grow as an organization. So that's the model. So how are societies doing? You, I'm sure, recall in 2020 when just about every society put out a anti-racism statement or a diversity statement. Everybody who didn't already have one started standing up a DEI committee. Some societies, such as AGU and GSA, were already well down the path of organizational DEI, and others had, understood that now they needed to do that. So in 2022, recently, just as of October this month, this is a snapshot of what 24 societies are working on. So there are a lot of program-related, program-focused efforts for members to educate them and include them. There's a lot of outward-focusing programs, but also societies are moving towards a real look at their leadership, starting to have assessment mechanisms in place so that they know how they're doing, providing more support for underrepresented and marginalized students and scientists, such as affinity groups or scholarships or meeting registration or all kinds of things, leadership capacity development, making meetings more safe and inclusive, auditing their recognitions process, and just starting to put more funding into it, etc. So that's a hopeful thing. It's starting to move towards that organizational frame for DEI, and I'll show you a little bit of detail of what's underneath a couple of these things. Okay, so these are some of the things that people said they were working on in their societies. So you can see a lot of effort on their nomination procedures, on having a standing DEI committee that has a role in a long-standing role in the organization to inform the society and advise usually. New kinds of partnerships, new leadership DEI responsibilities, and capacity building. Also, societies are starting to add more DEI expertise on, so that they can have a more evidence-based and expert approach to their DEI. And they're also starting to put in place assessments, primarily starting to assess the demographics of their membership, and also starting to review things like who gets recognized as part of their society. Some of the other kinds of assessments that are needed, such as an overall audit of top to bottom of the society's practices and whether or not they reflect an inclusive and equitable frame, that is starting. And then to a lesser extent, member needs and culture assessment, which we know is complex. So I'm very hopeful to see the movement that is happening among these societies, and thank all of my fellow presenters for all the work they're doing to also support. I know a lot of these societies are also participating in newer programs and projects, and very pleased that we can all work together to help societies make this movement. I invite you, if you'd like, to get on my calendar at that Calendly link, and if you'd like to talk more about this for you or your society. That's all.
Thanks, everyone. Chris, do you want to moderate the Q&A?
I certainly can.
So if folks have questions, they can just start typing them into the chat, or or I guess you'll unmute them if they want to speak.
Yeah, just raise your hand if you have any, specific questions, moving forward. So, I mean, just while we're waiting for folks, if they have any questions, I'd be curious, maybe Pranoti or one of the other folks, with AGU having sort of a number of efforts, going on and being involved, internally, how much coordination are you guys doing on the inside, in these efforts, let alone then, as we'll probably be talking about across the community?
Margaret, you want to handle that, or you want me to take that on?
I've just got a short answer. We talk all the time, so I would say pretty well coordinated.
Yeah,
Okay.
so things we learn in one program, we share out with other programs so that we, don't run into the same brick walls or things that have not worked well. We want to make sure that, we know about so that we don't do those again. So lots of conversations.
So, but not more organic then. More organic conversations than, it's not like you guys sit down every month and formally compare notes or anything.
I would say both.
Both, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, we're also in sort of different spaces. So, so the bridge program is mostly in the graduate education space, but we're also talking about changing cultures and departments, which is definitely attached to the work that is happening in landing. So things we learn in landing, we share out through our bridge department faculty community and vice versa. So
yeah. Cool. Kathy, you have your hand up. I'm gonna allow your mic, and you should be able to unmute yourself. I
wrote this in the chat, but I was really interested. I was really interested in the GeoAscend discussion, and in particular, I'd love to hear Steve Boss talk about what this emergent strategy is that he feels is ready to take off and transform things.
Thank you so much for that question, Kathy. I'm happy to discuss this a little bit. So to give a little additional background on Geosciences Ascend, I like complex systems, and this system that we created in Geosciences Ascend was incredibly complex. And I think the people who participated with us up in the last 2 years in Geosciences Ascend would agree with me that it was remarkably complicated and it was quite chaotic. It wasn't obvious where we were headed, what direction we were going to go, what was going to emerge from this, how it's going to come together as any kind of a useful strategy to move things forward. And part of that was the complexity, listening to lots and lots of different voices. All the societies are at different stages of development of their own understanding of DEI programs and processes and activities that they're engaged in. And we've listened for a long time and listened to our steering committee, listened to members of the RCN talking to us, and struggled to find our feet. But the underlying assumption or the underlying principle of Geosciences Ascend, one of the things we're trying to do is work at this cultural change and methods of cultural change. And the strategy that we were trying to employ is a methodology called community-based social marketing, CBSM. And there's some basic principles of CBSM that are very important to effect cultural change. CBSM is a method to effect broad behavioral changes among cultures, to effect cultural changes, renormalize the culture essentially. And once you change the normative behavior of the culture, by definition, you change the culture. And what we're doing at Geosciences Ascend right now, what we're engaged in right now, what emerged over the summer is not the end point at all, but it's absolutely a beginning. And I'm really excited about that, what's happening here. So, and what was cool about it was that out of this chaos emerged this solution, and the solution itself was kind of elegantly simple and was hiding in plain sight. And so that's what makes me really excited about it. And it's really catching on among all the societies right now. And what came out of discussions with all our groups and people who talk to me about diversity and equity and inclusion issues, especially, the shorthand of what they tell me when they're talking to me is that we're not sure what to do. And I think the question they need to ask rather is, what do we do is the wrong question. The right question to ask is, what are we willing to do? And that depends on where you're at with your particular society and your particular organizational group. And in CBSM, one of the underlying principles of CBSM, which comes out of the discipline of sustainability, is that you've got to start people off somewhere with cultural change with something that's an easy ask, an easy lift, a light lift to begin with. As you get a lot of people to buy into that change, initially you say, look, that was fun, wasn't it? Look what we did. We all did this together. We made this new thing happen. That was fun. Let's try something a little harder, and you sort of increase the difficulty level over time. You can't start off asking people to give up fossil fuels because they don't know how to do that. But you can have a program that starts off, say, with let's turn out the lights and save energy. And so, and that first step isn't necessarily the end point at all. It's the beginning, and the task itself isn't what's important. What's important is getting people to do it. And once you get them to do it, and they see this is actually kind of fun and interesting, then you can begin to ask more difficult things later on. And so what emerged out of Geosciences Ascend, with all these different societies, all the different stages of development, is this idea of what are you willing to do to move things forward? And what came out of this is that, well, a lot of societies are willing to engage in activities that they already do to some extent, offering short courses or field trips or engaging educational activities of various kinds about their society with different groups of people. What they haven't been doing is engaging diverse identities in these activities at all. And in the Geological Society of America, you probably are well aware that they have a program called On to the Future, which is their diversity program, where they bring in students on an annual basis to the annual meeting of GSA who represent diverse identities, and introduce them to GSA and kind of provide them a little bit of mentoring and show them around and sort of introduce them to the society in general. What they failed to do, generally speaking, is move that group out and make them available to the other societies, and the other societies themselves have not generally engaged in OTF either. So here there's this group of diverse identities in GSA hiding in plain sight. It's been ongoing for 10 years now. Several thousand students probably in the cohort of OTF over time. And other societies weren't really engaging them at all and doing things. So what we're doing with the societies is encouraging them to develop short courses or field exercises or some kind of skills course that's relevant to the discipline area and the expertise of their society, engage the OTF students in that, help these students come forward in the discipline, find their own way in the discipline. And many of the students get into the discipline, they're not sure where they want to go. They're uncertain about geosciences in general. They don't know what's available. They don't know what opportunities are available to them. They're exploring. And if people come forward and say, well, let's do this or let's do that, what are you interested in? Here's a program over here you can get involved in. And as the students find these things they're interested in and they get connected with the people who have the same interests in the discipline, then they can start to move forward and work with each other. And so this becomes, if we get societies to do this on a regular basis, the idea is these short courses or field trips, this has to become a cultural norm, a normative behavior of the society. Every year they're going to do this going forward. They always engage this group going forward and learn along the way inclusive practices, how to best engage those student groups. Now you're beginning to change the culture in ways that doesn't exist right now. So that's kind of what we're up to, and that's what I'm really excited about. And it's actually gaining traction pretty fast. Like there's a lot of momentum among the societies because we found a thing that they're willing to do. And now that they have the thing that's willing to do, now we're helping them do it in a way that promotes inclusive practices overall.
Perfect, great. So another question, this is related to the Bridge program. Are all partners in the Bridge program departments, or can interdepartmental programs participate?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Angela. So we have examples of both. So we have some departments just apply on their own, but then you often find departments that partner up. So if you look at our list of all the departments that are listed as Bridge partners on our webpage, you will see loan departments, paired departments, a school or a college, School of Ocean Science or College of Earth, whatever have you. So it can be either.
Excellent. So the question that's come in is a lot of organizations put accountability into their efforts, but what does that look like on the ground? How are folks being held accountable in these organizations? I guess I've seen very little evidence that the accountability aspect has much substance, yet in most organizations, when there's some senior internal researcher or abusers or continue to be protected. But I hope to be surprised. So what tangibly is being done and can be done on the accountability front in these areas? I think this is a good question, pretty much across the scope here.
And maybe I can answer first. Hi, Mike. Thanks for the really good question. And so our team has been thinking about accountability in a number of different ways. I mean, an obvious one, of course, is through establishing codes of conduct that actually have teeth in them and that have processes in them as well to both support the victims and the people who have been harmed by these behaviors, but also to deal with the people who are doing the harming. So I think that's one way, you know, and there's obviously problems in the processes as well, but I think still an important step. And we're actually starting to see some universities take this seriously, especially with, you know, new, you know, DOE and new NSF requirements for having some more processes. And like, you know, the Department of Energy recently came out with expectations that people who have DOE funding for research or for workshops, for example, for conferences, have codes of conduct. And I know that my university is already thinking about how they're going to how to change what they're doing to comply with that. So that's one level of accountability. And another level of accountability is through, you know, through the bystander intervention and kind of the community engagement. In a way, is, you know, we're trying to get people to hold each other accountable and to let people know that their behaviors are not acceptable, right? And thinking about, you know, ways that we can improve the way that we interact with each other. And I think that's been a problem, especially in academia, that we don't usually tend to mess in other people's business, right? And not step up or say anything when people are mistreating or being harmful. And so that's one way that I see of building accountability as well. You know, and I do acknowledge that there's still a long way to go for the real accountability that you're talking about in your post.
Steve, you had an additional comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from our perspective in Geosciences Ascend, because we're in the process of sort of linking potentially vulnerable identities with all these geoscience societies and the people who work in those societies and putting them together to work in short courses or field trips or whatever, we're very cognizant of the necessity and the importance of mentor selection and also appropriate mentor training. So one of the strategies we're going to be employing going forward is developing appropriate mentor training and mentor selection processes so that we can ensure that everybody has a good experience and that we don't want to bring people into a situation where they end up in an unsafe space or a non-inclusive environment. So we're going to be working really hard to implement inclusive practices and you know, building safe spaces and all these things as we join these people together.
Pranoti?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for asking that question. It's a great question. So in the Bridge program, you know, departments that put in these very, you know, elaborate applications, we kind of hold them accountable for all the things they say they're going to do, you know, to help the student progress towards their degree with the mentoring or whatever, you know, it is that they put in their department. So as they give us every semester, when they give us a report on how the student is doing, you know, is the student still enrolled or the student is having trouble, we read those reports to make sure that we can then, you know, reach out to the student or to the department to learn what is going on. We're also going to be starting to give students a survey for them to assess how things may be going. So it's not just hearing from the departments, but also from the students. So we've had an opportunity to sort of, you know, get involved in a couple of departments just to find out what was going on. You know, was it an issue of miscommunication between the mentor and the mentee, or, you know, was it something else? So thank you for that question. Great question.
Susan?
Yeah, thank you also, Mike, for that question. I think there's a couple things that I have in my mind. One is that there's different levels of accountability and different tools. So, you know, there's the nuclear options of firing people if you have that capability, or you know, removing people from an organization. And there's also equipping people who have say supervisory or other responsibilities to know that it's not just the, say, Title IX level violations, the federal policy violating problems that need to be addressed, but also that whole range of microaggressions and incivilities that Erika was talking about that those are things that supervisors can and need to address as a matter of organizational health and everybody's safety, and equipping them with tools, say progressive discipline tools, to work with people to redress those situations. And although I know it's not perfect, and I know that, and it's far from perfect, I would say that similarly, when we look at professional societies, there's a whole level of different kinds of accountability that you can build in. And so you can have things like session chairs having to have their slate of invited speakers be reviewed or something, or a slate of candidates for an honor have to be a diverse slate, in addition to all of the other things that they're doing. Just some level of feedback to make sure that you're not just guiding and encouraging people to do certain things, but that there is something built into the system to ensure that it's happening. Thank you.
Margaret, did you want to unmute?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I really appreciate what the others have said with respect to this. And these are the kinds of things that we are including in the curriculum for the Landing Academy. For the PRFP, the postdoc program or aspect of landing, we've had a couple of examples come up. So for example, we had an exercise and had an expert speak about contracts between the postdoctoral scholar and their and the principal investigator or their advisor. So just, best practices, how to treat each other as a mentor and a mentee, and then also what to do. For example, if you negotiate for certain things in your startup, specifically things that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that you would like to get started in your new job, what to do if those promises are not upheld and they're not followed through on. So those are just a couple of examples I wanted to add about how we're trying to incorporate understanding how to hold systems and people and institutions accountable. So thanks for the question.
So great conversation. So another question that just came in was, do landings fellows get paid?
Yes, they do. Yeah, so all costs. We have quarterly summits. They, because of COVID, they have been hybrid, but turns out that a hybrid is actually a inclusive way to do things. So if they decide to come to AGU headquarters in person, all travel, all meals are paid for, and they are given a stipend every year. For the postdocs, again, all costs of travel are covered, and they're funded through the NSF already. We also provide honoraria for all of our invited speakers because we also think that that's very important to pay people for the work and experience that they bring to the program.
So curious if any of the speakers think an ombudsman would be helpful with the accountability issue and creating a safe space. And next, what about accountability when the person in leadership is the initiator, for things like bystander training teams?
Chris, I can handle that with respect to the bridge program. So because these graduate students obviously are at institutions, when there has been, if there is an issue or an issue might come up, we request that in the application process, the institution actually outline what that process for complaint might be, for a student. So so for instance, there was one student that was having some issues, and so we literally went to the application to say, okay, if not the department chair, who's the next person? So at many institutions, an ombudsman is sort of listed as the person to go to when there's been issues. So I hope that helps with at least with respect to the bridge program.
Susan?
Yeah, thank you, Angela. That's a great question. My experience with this at our university is that, yes, the ombuds is an excellent resource. In part because depending on where you are, sometimes the Title IX office, it feels more like they're protecting the institution than the people. And also, the ombuds training is specifically about a collaborative approach to problem solving, and because it's confidential, it has a lot of potential. And I know that at my institute and university, it's a great way to solve problems between people, and I've used it myself. And I also know that if the ombuds is getting a lot of participation, I guess I'll say, by people about a particular problem or person, they can reach out to the unit as a problem-solving partner without making any of the people who have brought it to them, without making those people identifiable. So I think it's an excellent resource. As far as the people who are the leaders, I mean, basically everybody has a boss or a set of bosses, but it also takes will on the part of those bosses to rock the boat and hold the leader accountable. So I know it's difficult and that there aren't any easy answers.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, seeing none, and it's always hard for these, when they go over an hour. But this has been a great conversation. I think this is a fertile topic and a lot of exciting programs. So really appreciate everyone's participation and attention to this. I'm sure all of the speakers would be happy to have offline conversations as well about their programs and some of these issues. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Pranoti to help wrap us up.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you to everyone for your fantastic presentations and for the great conversations. And thank you so much for the audience for asking those phenomenal questions. So if you didn't catch any of our presenters, links to their programs or their emails, please feel free to email me at pasher@agu.org. I'm happy to answer any additional questions and also connect you to the speakers. If you're a department head or chair in waiting and you'd like to join the Heads and Chairs community, please reach out to me. We also have a workshop that is taking place at the AGU meeting that happens on the Sunday before the meeting begins. So we still have about a dozen or so seats left. If you're interested, please sign up soon. We have several webinars we've been doing earlier this year, and we've been doing webinars together for almost a decade. So if you would like to learn more about previous topics, please go to the website and enjoy all the recordings. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thank you.